They say the smell of rubbing alcohol, stale espresso, and bleached hospital linens is supposed to symbolize healing, a sterile sanctuary where lives are saved. For me, it will forever be the scent of the exact moment my entire universe violently collapsed in on itself. People think heartbreak is a slow, cinematic ache accompanied by rain and sad music. It's not. Real heartbreak is a physical trauma. It hits you like a defibrillator set to maximum voltage, stopping the breath in your lungs and freezing the blood in your veins, leaving you paralyzed while the world keeps spinning in agonizingly sharp focus. I remember standing in the harshly lit corridor of the surgical ward, the fluorescent tubes humming a monotonous, maddening buzz above my head. My legs felt like lead, my scrubs were stained with a stranger's blood, and my heart was hammering a frantic, warning rhythm against my ribs. I had just survived a grueling 14-hour shift, my first week as a surgical resident at Seattle General, a position I'd bled, sweat, and sacrificed my own sanity for. But I wasn't standing there trembling because of the relentless pressure of my new career. I was standing there because of Mark. Mark and I were supposed to be the golden couple of our medical school cohort. When we first met in anatomy lab, he was the charming, effortlessly charismatic guy who could make a joke while dissecting a cadaver, cutting through the suffocating tension of our grueling curriculum. I was the hyper-focused, chronically anxious overachiever who lived entirely on color-coded flashcards and panic. He was my gravity, I was his compass. At least that's the lie I told myself for 4 exhausting years. The truth, the ugly, unspoken reality that I buried beneath layers of devotion, was that Mark wouldn't have made it to graduation, let alone residency, without me. While he was out networking at dive bars or sleeping off hangovers, I was rewriting his case studies. When he failed his first board exam simulation, I spent 3 agonizing months sacrificing my own sleep to tutor him, drilling pharmacology into his head until my own eyes burned. I wrote the drafts for his personal statement. I coached him through his interview prep, masking his glaring academic gaps with practice, charming anecdotes. I poured every ounce of my ambition, my energy, and my soul into him, convincing myself that we were a team. I thought his success was my success. When match day finally arrived, that terrifying morning where you open an envelope that dictates the entire trajectory of your future, we stood in the crowded auditorium holding hands. I compromised my own rank list, prioritizing hospitals where Mark actually stood a chance, desperately hoping we wouldn't be separated. When we ripped open our letters and saw that we both matched into Seattle General, me in general surgery, him in internal medicine, he picked me up and spun me around, burying his face in my neck. "We did it, Chloe," he whispered, his voice thick with what I thought was gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without you. We're going to conquer this place together." I believed him. God, I was so utterly, pathetically naive. I thought the hardest part of our journey was behind us. We had our MDs, we had our matching navy blue scrubs, and we had each other. We moved into a cramped, overpriced apartment just 10 minutes from the hospital, mapping out our future, survive residency, pay off our crushing mountain of student debt, get married, and eventually open a joint practice. But the reality of residency is a brutal, soul-crushing crucible. It strips away all your carefully constructed facades and reveals exactly who you are in the dark. For me, it meant leaning into the chaos, finding a grim satisfaction in the adrenaline of the EA and the meticulous discipline of the OR. For Mark, the pressure cracked him almost immediately. Within the first 2 weeks, the shift in his demeanor was palpable. The charming, easygoing boy I loved vanished, replaced by a defensive, irritable stranger. He started snapping at me over burnt toast. He would come home, toss his keys on the counter, and barely look at me, claiming he was completely drained. I made excuses for him, of course. I told myself it was the sleep deprivation. I told myself he just needed time to adjust to the steep learning curve. I took on all the household chores, cooked his meals, and tiptoed around our apartment like a ghost, desperately trying to create a peaceful haven for him while I was secretly drowning in my own exhaustion. Then came the subtle, insidious red flags that I was too blindly in love to interpret. The sudden need to stay late to finish charting that turned into 3-4 extra hours after his shift ended. The way he placed his phone face down on the nightstand. The faint, unfamiliar scent of vanilla and cherry blossom lotion that clung to his scrubs, completely overpowering the standard hospital-grade soap. When I asked him about it, he laughed it off, gaslighting me with flawless execution. "Chloe, you're losing it," he'd scoff, rolling his eyes. A patient spilled hand sanitizer on me. Stop being so paranoid, I'm under a microscope with my attending right now. I swallowed the heavy, bitter lump of intuition in my throat and apologized. I actually apologized to him for doubting him. But the universe has a funny way of forcing you to look at the truth when you refuse to open your eyes. It was a miserable Tuesday evening. The rain was lashing against the massive windows of the hospital, turning the city into a blur of gray. My attending had mercifully cut me loose 30 minutes early after a brutal pediatric trauma case that had left me emotionally raw and physically hollow. All I wanted was Mark. I just wanted to wrap my arms around his waist, bury my face in his chest, and forget the scent of iodine and fear for 5 minutes. I checked the roster. He was supposed to be on call, assigned to the west wing of the 4th floor. I bought 2 overpriced lattes from the cafeteria, his favorite extra shot, no foam, and made my way up, a tired, hopeful smile playing on my lips. The corridors were unusually quiet, the night shift settling into its muted rhythm. I passed the nurse's station, offering a weary nod to the charge nurse, and headed toward the dimly lit hallway where the on-call sleep rooms were located. Room 412. I balanced the coffees in one hand, reaching for the handle with the other. I didn't knock. Why would I? It was my boyfriend, my future husband, my partner in everything. The heavy wooden door wasn't fully latched. It clicked open with a soft, metallic sigh, swinging inward just enough to let a sliver of hallway light slice through the darkness of the small room. And then time stopped. The sliver of light from the hallway fell directly onto the narrow, twin-sized mattress. There was no ambiguity, no room for a desperate, frantic misunderstanding. I saw the tangle of limbs, the frantic, messy collision of 2 bodies. I saw the distinctive floral pattern of the scrub top discarded on the linoleum floor. And then I smelled it, that sickeningly sweet wave of vanilla and cherry blossom. It was Jessica, one of the daytime cardio nurses. My brain struggled to process the image, misfiring in a chaotic panic, but my body reacted instantly. My hands went entirely numb, and the cardboard tray holding the 2 scalding lattes slipped from my grasp. The sound of the cups exploding against the floor was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Mark practically threw himself off the bed, stumbling backward, his face draining of all color as he scrambled to pull up his pants. Jessica let out a sharp, pathetic gasp, clutching a thin white sheet to her chest. "Chloe!" Mark's voice cracked, a pathetic, high-pitched squeak of sheer terror. "Chloe, wait please, it's not—" "Don't," I whispered. The word barely made it past the suffocating lump in my throat, but it carried enough venom to make him freeze. He took a step toward me, his hands raised in a pleading gesture, completely ignoring the puddle of hot coffee seeping into his socks. "I can explain. I swear, it's the stress, the hours, You were just what, Mark?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm, completely devoid of the hysterics he was probably expecting. Studying anatomy? Practicing bedside manner? I really looked at him, and all the love, all the exhausting devotion I poured into this man for the last 4 years simply evaporated. I didn't see my future husband. I saw a coward. A weak, selfish boy who had used me as a stepping stone and discarded me the moment he felt secure. "Don't come back to the apartment," I said, stepping backward out of the doorway. "Your things will be in trash bags in the hallway by morning. We are done." I turned on my heel and walked away. I didn't run. I forced myself to walk with steady, deliberate steps down the corridor, down the stairwell, and out through the sliding glass doors of the emergency exit. The moment the cold, relentless Seattle rain hit my face, the adrenaline vanished, my knees buckled. I stumbled blindly across the dimly lit employee parking lot, the tears finally tearing their way out of my chest in jagged, ugly sobs. I couldn't breathe. The pain was a physical weight, crushing my ribs, stealing my oxygen. Halfway to my rusted Honda Civic, the heel of my shoe caught on a jagged crack in the wet asphalt. I pitched forward, my hands instinctively flying out to break my fall. The impact was brutal. My palms scraped violently against the rough concrete, tearing through the skin, while my knees slammed into a deep puddle. I just lay there on the wet ground, the rain soaking through my clothes, blood welling up in the center of my hand, mixing with the muddy water. It was the most pathetic, humiliating moment of my entire existence. I didn't even have the strength to stand up. I just wanted the ground to open up and swallow me whole. "Are you all right?" The voice came from above me. Deep, resonant, and laced with genuine concern. It wasn't the voice of a panicked bystander. It was calm anchoring. I looked up through the curtain of my wet, tangled hair. A man was standing over me holding a large, black umbrella that instantly shielded me from the biting rain. He was tall, dressed in a sharp, tailored charcoal overcoat that screamed quiet, intimidating wealth. Even in the dim, yellow glow of the street lamp, I could see the striking lines of his face, a strong jaw, faint silver dusting at his temples, and dark, piercing eyes that seemed to take in my entire tragic state in a fraction of a second. I tripped. I choked out, a pathetic sob escaping my lips as I tried to push myself up. "Don't put weight on that hand," he commanded gently, crouching down in his expensive suit without a second's hesitation. He reached out, taking my wrist in a firm, warm grip. His fingers were strong, the touch sending a bizarre, completely involuntary jolt of electricity up my arm. He examined the bloody mess of my palm, his expression tightening. "That needs to be cleaned immediately or you're begging for an infection. My car is right here. I have a first aid kit." I should have said no. I should have thanked him, gotten into my own car, and driven home to cry into my pillow. But I was so completely broken, so devoid of any fight, that I just let him help me up. He guided me to a sleek black Audi parked a few spaces away, opening the passenger door. The interior smelled of expensive leather, cedar, and rain. He retrieved a sleek medical kit from the trunk, sat in the driver's seat, and turned on the overhead light. For 10 minutes, the only sound was the rhythmic beating of the rain against the windshield as he meticulously cleaned my wound with antiseptic wipes. He didn't ask me why I was sobbing in a parking lot. He didn't ask about my ruined scrubs. He just offered a quiet, intense presence that felt like an anchor in the middle of a hurricane. "I'm sorry," I whispered, shivering as the adrenaline crash fully set in. My whole life completely fell apart about 20 minutes ago." He paused, looking up from my hand. His dark eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, the air in the small cabin grew heavy, thick with a sudden, suffocating tension. "Then it sounds like you shouldn't be alone right now." I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was trauma. Maybe it was the desperate, burning need to erase the memory of Mark and Jessica. Or maybe it was just the magnetic, undeniable pull of the man sitting next to me. But when he finished bandaging my hand, I didn't pull away. I leaned in. Our lips met, and it was like throwing gasoline on a dying fire. The kiss wasn't hesitant. It was a collision. He groaned, a deep, primal sound that vibrated against my chest, and suddenly his hands were in my wet hair, pulling me across the center console. I kissed him back with a furious, desperate hunger, pouring all my grief, my anger, and my shattered pride into the taste of him. The drive to his apartment was a blur of heavy breathing and silent, burning anticipation. His place was a penthouse in downtown floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city, minimalist, immaculate, but I barely noticed the view. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut behind us, he pressed me against it. There was no awkward fumbling. He moved with a commanding, intoxicating certainty that made my head spin. His large hands slid up my thighs, grabbing the hem of my ruined dress and pulling it over my head in one fluid motion. My skin burned everywhere he touched me. When he finally lifted me, my legs wrapping around his waist, I buried my face in his neck, breathing in the scent of him, letting him completely consume me. For hours, he dismantled me. He made me forget my name, my pain, and the absolute wreckage of my life. He made me feel worshipped. When I woke up the next morning, the space beside me in the massive, silk-sheeted bed was empty, though the indentation of his body was still warm. I could hear the faint sound of a shower running down the hall. Reality crashed down on me like a falling piano. What had I done? I had slept with a complete stranger. A beautiful, devastatingly intense stranger, but a stranger nonetheless. I panicked. I scrambled out of bed, finding my dry, discarded clothes, and threw them on with trembling hands. I didn't leave a note. I practically ran out of the penthouse, catching an Uber back to my apartment just in time to pack Mark's belongings into garbage bags, exactly as I had promised. I spent the rest of the day in a zombie-like trance, convinced that the worst was over. I had ripped off the Band-Aid. The cheating was exposed, the relationship was dead, and I had successfully used a reckless one-night stand to numb the amputation. Tomorrow I would march into the hospital, ignore Mark's existence, and throw myself into surgery. I thought the hardest battle of my life was just surviving the gossip of the residency program. I thought I knew the exact dimensions of my nightmare. I had absolutely no idea. I walked through the sliding glass doors of Seattle, General the next morning running entirely on 3 hours of adrenaline-laced sleep and a dangerous amount of caffeine. My hands were shoved deep into the pockets of my white coat, the heavy bandages on my palms a stark, throbbing reminder of my spectacular rock bottom. I had rehearsed exactly how I was going to handle Mark. I would be ice. I would look right through him. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a single tear. But as I slipped into the crowded conference room for morning surgical rounds, Mark wasn't even on my radar. The chief of surgery was standing at the front of the room, tapping a pen against the podium to quiet the exhausted residents. "All right, listen up," he barked. "Before we review the overnight charts, I want to formally introduce the new head of trauma. He just transferred from Mass Gen, and he will be directly overseeing all first-year surgical residents. You report to him. You breathe when he says so. Dr. Sterling, the floor is yours." A man stepped out from the shadows near the projector screen, the harsh fluorescent lights catching the faint silver at his temples. He was wearing pristine, perfectly pressed navy scrubs under a tailored white coat. My lungs completely stopped working. It was him, the man with the umbrella. The man from the Audi, the man whose bed I'd fled from just a few hours ago. Dr. Sterling surveyed the room with dark, calculating eyes, radiating an effortless, terrifying authority. And then his gaze swept over the second row and locked violently onto mine. I saw the exact microsecond his breath hitched. I saw the microscopic widening of his eyes, the sudden tightening of his jaw. The temperature in the room plummeted. I was staring at my new boss, the man who held the absolute power to make or break my residency, remembering exactly how his hands felt on my waist. I thought I was going to throw up right there on the linoleum. But the universe, in its infinite, sadistic cruelty, wasn't done with me yet. The heavy doors at the back of the conference room swung open, and Mark stumbled in. He looked like a wreck. His scrubs were wrinkled. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he reeked of stale alcohol and desperation. He ignored the furious glare of the chief of surgery, practically shoving past 2 nurses as he marched straight toward the front of the room. He didn't look at me. He looked directly at the new head of trauma. "Dad," Mark said, his voice echoing loudly in the dead silent room. "Dad, please, I need to talk to you in private. It's an emergency." The word hit me like a physical blow to the head. Dad. The ringing in my ears became deafening. The edges of my vision went entirely black. Dr. Sterling, Alexander Sterling, was Mark's father. I had just slept with my cheating ex-boyfriend's father. The man whose bed I had just crawled out of was the man who had funded Mark's tuition. The man Mark had always spoken of with a mixture of deep fear and bitter resentment. Alexander's face turned to absolute stone. He looked at his son, then slowly, agonizingly, his eyes drifted back to me. The realization hitting him was visible. He saw the way Mark was actively avoiding looking in my direction. He did the math. The girl crying in the parking lot. The girl who said her life had just fallen apart. "Dr. Hayes." Alexander's voice cut through the room like a scalpel, sharp, cold, and utterly terrifying. "My office, now." I don't remember the walk to his office. I was entirely numb, operating on pure, primal terror. The moment I crossed the threshold of his massive, mahogany-paneled office, he slammed the door behind us and turned the deadbolt with a sharp, final click. He didn't walk behind his desk. He closed the distance between us in 3 long predatory strides, his towering frame backing me up until my shoulders hit the cold wood of the door. He was vibrating with a quiet, lethal fury. "Was this a game to you?" He snarled, his voice a low, dangerous whisper that sent a shiver straight down my spine. "A little revenge plot? You catch my son cheating, so you track me down and throw yourself at me. Is that it? Did you take pictures, Chloe? Were you planning to blackmail him? Are you insane?" I screamed back, the shock finally shattering, replaced by a massive, blinding wave of rage. I shoved my hands against his chest, trying to push him away, but he didn't budge an inch. "I had no idea who you were. He never showed me pictures of you. He told me you two barely spoke. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to find out I just slept with my boss? With Mark's father? You expect me to believe you just magically fell into my car?" He fired back, his hands slamming flat against the door on either side of my head, trapping me. "You expect me to believe you didn't know exactly whose bed you were in?" I was bleeding in a parking lot. I yelled, hot, angry tears finally spilling over my eyelashes. My life was destroyed. You were just a stranger who was kind to me. If I knew who you were, I would have rather bled out on the asphalt." We were breathing heavily, our chests heaving, standing inches apart. The air in the room was so thick it was suffocating. He stared down at me, his dark eyes searching my face, tearing through my defenses, looking for a lie. He didn't find one. He saw the sheer, unadulterated panic in my eyes. He saw the utter devastation. And then the anger in his eyes fractured, morphing instantly into something entirely different. Something infinitely more dangerous. The proximity, the screaming, the raw, unfiltered adrenaline, it was a match dropped into a powder keg. He looked at my mouth, a muscle feathering in his jaw. He let out a ragged, defeated groan, burying his hand in my hair and gripping the back of my neck. "God help us both," he muttered. He didn't kiss me, he devoured me. It was desperate, violent, and completely inappropriate. It was a spectacular, catastrophic mistake, and I didn't care. I grabbed the lapels of his pristine white coat, pulling him closer, kissing him back with a furious, destructive hunger. He spun me around, sweeping a stack of patient files and a brass pen holder off his heavy oak desk with a violent crash. He lifted me onto the edge of the wood, his hands tearing at my scrubs, stripping away the boundaries of sanity, ethics, and reason. We didn't speak. We couldn't. It was an explosive, reckless collision fueled by shock and a forbidden, undeniable gravity. For the next month, my life became an agonizing, high-wire act of deception. By day, Dr. Sterling was my brutal, unforgiving attending, pushing me harder than any other resident, critiquing my sutures with merciless precision. By night, Alexander was my secret, a devastating addiction I couldn't break. We sneaked into empty on-call rooms. We stayed late in the archives. We were playing Russian roulette with our careers, with Mark wandering the same halls, completely oblivious to the fact that his father and his ex-girlfriend were slowly destroying everything. We thought we were so careful. We thought we were in control of the chaos. But biology doesn't care about your secrets. It started on a Tuesday, exactly 4 weeks after the night in the rain. I was standing in the OR assisting Alexander with a complex bowel resection, when the harsh smell of cauterized tissue, a smell I had endured 1,000 times, suddenly made the room spin. I barely made it out of the sterile field before violently throwing up in the scrub sink. I blamed it on exhaustion. I blamed it on the stress of hiding from Mark. But when my period was 5 days late, the cold, creeping dread became impossible to ignore. I bought the test at a dingy gas station 3 towns over, terrified of running into anyone from the hospital. Now, sitting on the cold tile floor of my tiny apartment bathroom, my hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the plastic stick. I closed my eyes, praying to any god that would listen. Please, I have lost my dignity, my relationship, and my moral compass. Just don't take my future. I opened my eyes and looked down. 2 glaring, unmistakable pink lines. Pregnant with my ex-boyfriend's father's baby. For 3 agonizing days, I carried the secret like a live grenade in my scrubs. Every time I scrubbed into an OR, every time I caught Alexander's dark, commanding gaze across a crowded trauma bay, I felt the pin slipping further out. I was a doctor. I understood the biology, the statistics, the unforgiving reality of a first-trimester pregnancy. But logic couldn't stop the sheer, suffocating terror from clawing at my throat. I wasn't just risking a reprimand anymore. I was risking my medical license, my entire future, and the total annihilation of whatever fragile, twisted bond Alexander and I had built in the shadows. The breaking point arrived on a Friday night. A massive multi-car pileup on the I-5 had turned the emergency department into a war zone. I had been on my feet for 18 hours, running on half a protein bar and sheer adrenaline. As I finally finished suturing a laceration in Bay 4, a wave of dizziness hit me so hard my knees buckled. The sterile room tilted violently. I barely managed to strip off my bloody gloves before the nausea clawed its way up. I stumbled blindly down the back corridor toward the empty attending locker rooms, pushing through the heavy door and collapsing over the nearest sink. I was dry heaving, shaking uncontrollably, tears of pure exhaustion and terror streaming down my face. I splashed freezing water on my cheeks, staring at my pale, haunted reflection in the mirror. I couldn't do this alone anymore. I couldn't. Chloe? I jumped, whipping around. Alexander was standing in the doorway, still in his surgical cap, his mask pulled down around his neck. He looked exhausted, but the moment his eyes locked onto my shaking frame, the fatigue vanished, replaced by a razor-sharp, terrifying intensity. He crossed the room in 2 strides, ignoring protocol, ignoring the fact that anyone could walk in. He gripped my shoulders, his thumbs pressing into my collarbones. "You're pale as a ghost and vibrating," he demanded, his voice dropping to that low, authoritative octave that always made my heart stagger. "What happened? Did you stick yourself? Are you sick?" "Lock the door," I choked out, my voice cracking. He didn't hesitate. He reached back, hitting the heavy deadbolt. The click echoed like a gunshot in the tiled room. "Alexander," I whispered, his name tasting foreign and dangerous on my tongue. I looked up into his eyes, watching the protective fury in them shift into deep concern. "I'm not sick. I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a bomb dropping, suspended in the air just a microsecond before the shockwave obliterates everything. I watched his face, the brilliant stoic surgeon who never panicked under pressure. He froze, his dark eyes widened, dropping instinctively to my flat stomach before snapping back up to my face. I braced myself for the denial, for the anger, for him to tell me I had ruined his career. Instead, he let out a ragged breath, pulling me violently against his chest. He buried his face in my hair, his large hands gripping my back as if he was afraid I would shatter into a million pieces. "Are you sure?" He murmured against my temple, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my cheek. "Yes," I sobbed, clutching his scrub top. "Alexander, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to my career, your position, they'll fire us both. They'll ruin us." "Mark." "To hell with the board," he growled, pulling back just enough to force me to look at him. His eyes were blazing with a fierce, uncompromising possessiveness that stole the breath from my lungs. "To hell with my position. Do you understand me? You are not alone in this. This is my child. We are going to—" "You're what?" The voice ripped through the room like a chainsaw. Alexander and I violently ripped apart. The door connecting the locker room to the adjoining resident lounge was wide open. Standing in the threshold, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror and disgust, was Mark. He had the spare master key dangling from his fingers. The blood drained from my body so fast I thought I was going to pass out. "Mark," Alexander said, his voice instantly dropping back into its cold, authoritative register, instinctively stepping in front of me to shield me from his son's gaze. "Step out of the room." "Your child?" Mark repeated, his voice rising to a hysterical, manic pitch. He stepped into the locker room, his eyes darting frantically between my pale face and his father's defensive stance. The realization hit him, distorting his features into something ugly and vicious. You're sleeping with my dad? You dumped me for a nurse and you went straight to my father?" "You cheated on her, Mark," Alexander fired back, his tone lethal. "You broke her. Do not stand there and play the victim." "Oh, I'm the villain?" Mark screamed, spittle flying from his lips, taking another aggressive step forward. "You hypocritical piece of shit. You lecture me my entire life about ethics, about being a respectable doctor, and you're fucking my ex-girlfriend in the hospital supply closets, a first-year resident. You're her boss." Mark laughed, a high broken sound that echoed terrifyingly off the tiles. He pulled his phone out of his pocket, his hands shaking with malicious, triumphant adrenaline. "This is gold. This is absolute gold. You always thought you were untouchable, Dad. You always looked down on me." "Put the phone away, Mark," Alexander warned, his voice dangerously quiet. The air in the room felt dangerously thin. "No," Mark spat, glaring directly at me. The hatred in his eyes was blinding. "You wanted to ruin my life, Chloe? You thought you could just upgrade to the chief of trauma and keep your little perfect residency? I'm going straight to the medical board. I'm going to the chief of staff. I'm going to watch them strip both of your licenses. And I'm going to laugh while they march you out of this hospital." "Mark, please," I begged, stepping out from behind Alexander, the maternal terror overriding my logic. "This isn't about us anymore. There is a baby. Please, don't do this." "A baby?" Mark sneered, his thumb hovering over the dial pad. "Good, then you'll have plenty of time to be a mother when you're unemployed and disgraced." He pressed the call button. "Mark," Alexander roared. He lunged forward, grabbing Mark by the collar of his scrubs and slamming him violently against the metal lockers. The crash was deafening. The phone clattered to the floor, skidding across the tiles. I screamed as Alexander pinned his own son to the metal, his forearm pressed against Mark's throat. Mark was choking, thrashing against his father's immense strength, but Alexander's eyes were utterly dead, stripped of all paternal restraint. He looked ready to kill him. But as I lunged forward to pull Alexander off, a blinding, white-hot knife of pain ripped through my lower abdomen. It was so sudden, so incredibly violent, that my vision instantly whited out. I couldn't even scream. The air vanished from my lungs. I crumpled, collapsing onto the hard, cold tiles, clutching my stomach as a terrifying, agonizing wetness began to spread between my legs. The sound of Mark hitting the floor as Alexander abruptly released him was drowned out by the roaring in my own ears. I couldn't breathe. The agony tearing through my abdomen was a blinding, white-hot fire, but it was nothing compared to the absolute, soul-crushing terror of feeling the warm, sticky dampness soaking through my scrubs. No, please God, no. Alexander was on his knees beside me in a fraction of a second. The terrifying, authoritative head of trauma was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, panicked man whose hands were actually trembling as they hovered over my body. "Chloe," he choked out, his voice cracking with a raw, primal fear I had never heard before. He pressed his hands against my lower stomach, his medical instincts fighting a losing battle against his emotional devastation. He looked up at Mark, who was backed against the lockers, his phone forgotten on the floor, staring at the growing pool of crimson on the white tiles with wide, horrified eyes. "Get a stretcher." Alexander roared, the sheer volume and ferocity of his voice shaking the walls. "Call a code. Move, damn it." For a second, I thought Mark was going to run. I thought the hatred would win. But the sight of my blood, the reality of the fragile life slipping away on the floor, seemed to shatter the vindictive spell he was under. He scrambled backward, ripping the door open, his voice echoing down the corridor as he screamed for a crash cart. Alexander scooped me into his arms. I buried my face into his chest, clutching the fabric of his scrubs as a fresh wave of pain pulled me under. The last thing I remember before the darkness entirely consumed me was the frantic rhythm of his heart and his voice whispering fiercely into my hair, "I've got you. I am not letting you go. Stay with me, Chloe." I woke up to the smell of rubbing alcohol and the steady, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. For a terrifying, disorienting moment, my brain couldn't stitch the narrative back together. I felt the heavy drag of 4 fluids on my arm and the dull, throbbing ache in my pelvis. And then the memory of the locker room crashed down on me like an anvil. I gasped, my hands flying instantly to my stomach, a sob ripping from my throat. It's okay." "You're okay." A warm, heavy hand enveloped both of mine. I turned my head, blinking against the harsh lights. Alexander was sitting in a chair pulled flush against the hospital bed. He looked like he had aged a decade. He was still in the same blood-stained scrub pants, his shirt wrinkled, his dark hair a chaotic mess. There were deep, purple shadows under his eyes, but as he looked at me, they shone with a fierce, watery relief. "The baby?" I whispered, terrified of the answer. "Safe," he breathed, pressing a desperate kiss to my knuckles. He closed his eyes, a single tear escaping and tracking down his jaw. "You had a severe subchorionic hemorrhage brought on by extreme stress. It was a threatened miscarriage, but the ultrasound showed a strong heartbeat. You're both safe." I collapsed back against the pillows, the relief so absolute it felt like a physical weight lifting off my chest. We stayed like that for a long time, the silence of the private recovery room wrapping around us, broken only by the beautiful mechanical proof of our child's survival. "Mark?" I finally asked, the name tasting like ash. Alexander's jaw tightened, but the fury was gone, replaced by a profound, heavy exhaustion. He stayed until they wheeled you into the OR. When the attendant confirmed the baby was viable, he packed his locker. "He transferred to a program in Chicago this morning," he said. "He said he never wanted to see either of us again." I closed my eyes, absorbing the wreckage. We had survived the medical crisis, but the professional guillotine was still hanging directly over our necks. "He's going to tell the board, Alexander. He's going to destroy you." "He doesn't have to," Alexander said quietly. I opened my eyes, frowning in confusion. Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out his hospital badge, the heavy gold-plated clip that read Head of Trauma Surgery. He placed it gently on the nightstand beside my bed. While you were under, he continued, his voice terrifyingly calm, I walked into the chief of staff's office. I handed in my resignation. I told them everything. I took full, unequivocal responsibility. I stated that I pursued a subordinate, that I abused the power dynamic, and that you were entirely blameless. No, I cried, trying to sit up, the IV line pulling taut. Alexander, your career. You spent 20 years building this. You can't just throw it away from me. He stood up, leaning over the bed, his hands framing my face, forcing me to look directly into his dark, unwavering eyes. Listen to me, Chloe. I didn't throw anything away. I made a trade. I traded a title and a corner office for the only thing in my life that actually matters. They won't touch your residency. Your record is spotless. You are going to finish this program and you are going to be a brilliant surgeon. He brushed a stray lock of hair behind my ear, his thumb tracing my cheekbone. I was a dead man walking these halls, Chloe. I was prestigious and I was entirely hollow. You brought me back to life in that parking lot. I would burn my own kingdom to the ground 1,000 times over just to keep you warm. They say trauma leaves a scar that never fully fades, a permanent reminder of the exact moment you broke. But they don't tell you that sometimes the bone heals back thicker, stronger, capable of carrying a weight you never imagined you could bear. It's been 3 years. I don't flinch at the smell of rubbing alcohol anymore. I just finished my 4th year of surgical residency, and tomorrow I'll be leading my own team in the OR. I push open the heavy oak door of our townhouse, shaking the Seattle rain off my umbrella. The scent of the hospital is immediately replaced by the smell of roasting garlic and cedarwood. From the living room, I hear a sound that instantly melts away the exhaustion of a 14-hour shift, the bright, bell-like laughter of a 2-year-old boy. I walk into the room, leaning against the doorframe. Alexander is sitting on the rug, dressed in a soft cashmere sweater, a far cry from the terrifying, tailored suits and crisp white coats he used to wear. He's building a slightly crooked tower of wooden blocks while our son Leo giggles and aggressively knocks it down. Alexander runs a highly successful private surgical clinic now, but looking at him sitting on the floor, covered in toy cars, you would never know he was once the most feared man at Seattle General. He looks up, sensing my presence. His dark eyes lock onto mine, and the smile that spreads across his face is so warm, so completely unguarded, it still steals the breath from my lungs. Mama, Leo shrieks, abandoning the blocks and running toward me on unsteady toddler legs. I drop my bag, crouching down to catch him, burying my face in his soft, sweet-smelling hair. Alexander walks over, wrapping his arms around both of us from behind, pressing a kiss to the crown of my head. My life didn't go according to the neat, color-coded plan I created in medical school. It shattered violently in the darkest, most humiliating way possible. But as I hold my son and lean back into the chest of the man who risked absolutely everything for me, I realize something profound. Sometimes the universe doesn't destroy your life to punish you. Sometimes it tears down the fragile, suffocating walls of the wrong life, just so you have enough room to build the right one.